The day my grandfather's estate was finally divided, my parents looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We want the house, the land, the investments, everything." Their lawyer quietly leaned toward me. "Anna, don't sign those papers." I looked at my father, then at my mother, then at my brother. I smiled, picked up the pen, and said, "Give them exactly what they want." Everyone in the room thought I'd completely lost my mind. My father smiled. My mother finally looked relieved. My brother actually laughed. But none of us noticed. Their own lawyer had just stopped reading the last page. Welcome to Silent Grudge Stories, where some wounds never truly heal, some betrayals are never forgotten, and silence often says more than revenge ever could. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you've ever wondered what happens when the person everyone underestimated finally stops staying silent, make sure to subscribe. Because this story is only beginning. When my parents walked out of that lawyer's office that morning, they believed they'd finally won. Looking back now, I almost wish I could have seen their faces one last time before everything changed. My grandfather had been gone for only 11 days. His funeral was over. The flowers were already beginning to wilt. And somehow, my parents couldn't wait another minute. They insisted we meet with the estate attorney before the rest of the family had even finished grieving. "It'll be easier if we settle everything now," my father had said over the phone. Not, "How are you holding up?" Not, "Do you need anything?" Just, "We need your signature." I should have expected it. My entire life had been one long lesson in knowing exactly where I stood inside my own family. And that place was always behind Eric. Eric Moore, my older brother, the son my parents proudly called their greatest achievement, the one who never heard the word no, the one who always walked into every room already certain the world belonged to him. If Eric wanted something, my parents found a way to make it happen. If I wanted something, they found a reason why I didn't deserve it. By the time I was 10, I had stopped asking for fairness. By 16, I had stopped expecting it. By 34, I had learned that disappointment hurt a lot less when you saw it coming. The conference room smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. Large windows overlooked the city, but no one bothered looking outside. Every eye in the room stayed fixed on the thick stack of documents resting in front of Harold Benson. Harold had represented my parents for years. He wasn't expressive. He wasn't emotional. If anything, he seemed almost uncomfortable that morning. He adjusted his glasses twice before speaking. "As requested," he said calmly, "I've prepared the final transfer documents." My father leaned back with a satisfied smile. "Good." Across from him, Eric was already checking listings for luxury pickup trucks on his phone. He hadn't inherited a single dollar yet, but he was already spending it. My mother noticed me watching him. "He deserves to enjoy himself," she said. I smiled politely. "I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to." She folded her arms. "You've always been jealous of your brother." I almost laughed. "Jealous? No. Jealousy implies believing something could have been yours. I had stopped believing that years ago." Harold cleared his throat. "The estate consists of the main residence, approximately 400 acres of farmland, multiple investment accounts, several commercial leases, and other financial holdings listed in Schedule C." Eric grinned. "Grandpa really knew how to build wealth." "He certainly did," my father replied. "And now it stays exactly where it belongs." His eyes shifted toward me. Inside this family, I looked down at the documents. Funny, I had spent my entire life trying to become part of this family. Apparently, today was the day they finally decided to make it official. Just not in the way most daughters would hope. My father slid the paperwork toward me. "Sign it." I didn't reach for the pen. "Not yet." Harold looked at me for a brief second. Something about his expression changed. Almost like he wanted to say something, but couldn't. And that tiny hesitation was the first crack in a morning everyone else believed would be perfect. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched just long enough for me to hear the soft ticking of the antique clock hanging on the conference room wall. My father finally broke it. "Anna!" His voice carried that familiar mixture of authority and disappointment I'd heard my entire life. "We're trying to make this easy." Easy. The word almost made me smile. There had never been anything easy about being their daughter. Harold carefully pushed the folder another inch toward me. "I think," he said cautiously, "it would be appropriate for Anna to review every document before making a final decision." My father waved the suggestion away. "She's had enough time." "I only received these yesterday," I answered calmly. "You don't need weeks to understand something this simple," my mother replied before Harold could speak again. Her tone wasn't angry. It was worse. It was patient. The kind of patience someone reserves for explaining obvious things to a child. "You already know your grandfather wanted this family to stay together." Eric leaned back in his chair, crossing one ankle over his knee. "And let's be honest," he chuckled. "What would you even do with 400 acres? My mother laughed softly. "So true. You've never understood this business." My father nodded. "Your brother has." Another familiar sentence. Eric understands. Anna doesn't. I couldn't remember the first time I'd heard those words. Only that they followed me through almost every stage of my life. When Grandpa taught Eric how to negotiate livestock prices, I was asked to help clear the dishes. When Eric attended business meetings, I was told someone needed to organize family birthdays. When Grandpa started talking about succession, my parents somehow answered every question before I had the chance. Eventually, I stopped asking. My father folded his hands on the table. "You've built your own career. You've always said you wanted your independence. So why fight over something you've never cared about?" Another lie. Not because I wanted the land. Not because I wanted the money. Because Grandpa had never treated me differently. Not once. He was the only person in the family who looked at Eric and me and saw two grandchildren instead of one heir and one disappointment. Harold slowly turned another page. His forehead tightened. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. He read the paragraph again, then adjusted his glasses. Again. Something wasn't sitting right with him. My father noticed. "Problem." Harold hesitated. "No." Then he stopped himself. "Nothing that can't wait." He closed the file. My father seemed satisfied with the answer. I wasn't. For the first time since walking into that office, I wondered if Harold had seen something the rest of us hadn't. My mother reached across the table and gently placed the pen beside my hand. It looked almost affectionate, until she spoke. "You've made enough scenes over the years. Don't make this another one." I looked at her. I couldn't remember the last time she touched my hand. Funny, the only time she reached for me was to make sure I signed away my place in the family. Eric checked his watch. "I've got dinner reservations. Can we finish this?" My father smiled proudly, always thinking ahead. Then he looked at me. "Your brother has a future to build. You don't need to stand in his way." The room became very still. I looked down at the signature line. My name was already printed there. Waiting. One signature. That was all my parents had wanted for weeks. One signature. To finally erase me. Harold opened his mouth again. "Anna!" This time, everyone turned toward him. "If you're unsure, there's absolutely nothing wrong with taking a little more time." It was the first genuine kindness anyone had offered me that morning. Before I could answer, my father cut him off. "She's sure." He looked directly at me. "Aren't you?" Every eye in the room settled on my face. My mother's, Eric's, Harold's. Even the assistant sitting quietly near the door stopped taking notes. No one moved. No one breathed. I wrapped my fingers around the pen. Then, for the first time that morning, I smiled. "You're right." I uncapped it. "I don't want to fight anymore." My mother's shoulders relaxed. Eric let out a quiet laugh. My father looked almost relieved, as if I'd finally become the daughter he'd always wanted, the daughter who knew her place. I lowered the pen, signed my name, closed the folder, and gently slid it back across the table. My father reached for it immediately. "So," he said with a satisfied smile, "that settles everything." But before anyone could stand, I noticed something strange. Harold wasn't looking at my father. He wasn't looking at Eric. He wasn't even looking at me. He was staring. at the final page, and for the second time that morning, he stopped reading. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then my father laughed, not loudly, just enough for everyone in the room to understand one thing. He'd won. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and picked up the folder as if it already belonged to him. As expected, my mother smiled at him. I told you she'd come to her senses. Eric stretched in his chair, slipped his phone into his pocket, and grinned. I guess we're celebrating tonight. Nobody looked at me. Not anymore. It was strange. 30 seconds earlier, my signature had been the only thing anyone cared about. Now, I had become invisible again. Harold remained seated. The file was still open in front of him. His eyes drifted back to the final pages. He didn't say a word. My father noticed. Everything all right? Harold looked up. There was a pause. Barely 2 seconds. Then he closed the folder. Everything has been signed. My father nodded. Good. He never answered the question. We walked toward the elevator together. No one spoke to me. Eric was already talking about renovations. The kitchen has to go. My mother agreed immediately. It feels outdated. The guest house, too, Eric continued. We could turn it into a gym. My father laughed. Now you're thinking like an owner. Like an owner. Grandpa's house. The same house where I'd spent every summer. The same porch where he taught me how to play chess. The same workshop where he let me build crooked little birdhouses because he insisted perfection didn't matter. To them, it had already become a renovation project. The elevator doors opened. My mother stepped inside first. She looked at me. You'll come by this weekend. It wasn't a question. We'll need your room emptied. I blinked. My room. You don't expect to keep it. Eric chuckled. You haven't lived there in years. That was true, but it had never stopped being my room. My father pressed the lobby button. We're converting it into my office. Just like that. 34 years of memories, replaced in a single sentence. The elevator reached the ground floor. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm. My father pulled his car keys from his pocket. I'll drive your mother. Eric raised his hand. I'll follow behind. Then my father looked at me. You'll figure out your own way home. No offer. No goodbye. No hesitation. The three of them walked across the parking lot together, laughing, planning, pointing at furniture catalogs on Eric's phone. I stood there until their cars disappeared into traffic. Only then did I finally breathe. A familiar voice interrupted the silence. Anna! I turned. Harold was standing near the courthouse entrance. The folder was tucked beneath his arm. I wanted to ask you something. I waited. He hesitated, long enough that I wondered if he'd changed his mind. Finally, he spoke. Why didn't you ask for more time? I smiled faintly. Would it have changed anything? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked back down at the folder. His thumb rested against one specific page, almost unconsciously, as if he couldn't stop thinking about it. I've handled estate cases for almost 28 years, he said quietly. I've seen siblings fight for years. I've seen children sue their own parents. I've seen families destroy themselves over far less than this. He met my eyes. I've never seen someone give everything away this easily. Neither had I. For a moment, it felt like he wanted to say something else, something important. Instead, he simply nodded. I hope you know what you're doing. I held his gaze. So do I. His expression didn't change, but he didn't walk away. He looked at the folder again, then toward the parking lot where my parents had left. Back to the folder. Something wasn't leaving his mind. Finally, he slipped the documents into his briefcase. I need to review something. I frowned. I thought everything was finished. So did I. Those 4 words stopped me. Before I could ask what he meant, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, ignored the call, then looked back at me one last time. I wouldn't make any major decisions today, he said carefully. If I were them. I watched him walk away, slowly, thoughtfully, without once looking back. For the first time since I'd signed those papers, someone else looked uncertain. And somehow, that unsettled me even more than my parents' celebration. Because whatever Harold had noticed, He still hadn't told anyone. Not even me. The next morning, my parents were already acting like the estate had belonged to them for years. At 9:13, my phone buzzed. Not because they wanted to see me, because they wanted access to Grandpa's house. My father had sent one short message. Be there at 10. We need your key. Not please. Not can you. Just another order. By the time I pulled into the driveway, 3 SUVs were already parked outside. The front door stood wide open. Furniture movers walked in and out carrying boxes. The sound of drills echoed through the hallway. I stopped at the entrance. For a second, it didn't even feel like Grandpa's home anymore. It looked like strangers had broken in. Only, the strangers were my own family. Eric stood in the living room with a tablet in his hands. He wasn't looking at family photographs. He wasn't looking at Grandpa's favorite armchair. He was pointing at walls. This one comes down. And this fireplace. We replace it with stone. One of the contractors nodded. My mother smiled proudly. I told you he'd know exactly what to do. My father noticed me standing at the door. You're late. I looked around the room. The old grandfather clock was gone. The handmade rocking chair Grandpa built 40 years earlier. Gone. His books, stacked inside cardboard boxes. His paintings, leaning against the wall with bright orange stickers marked sell. It had taken them less than 24 hours to erase him. I stepped toward the bookshelf. One framed photograph still remained. Grandpa and me. I reached for it. Before my fingers touched the frame, my mother picked it up first. She looked at it for a moment, then handed it to me. You can take this. That was it. One picture. 34 years of memories, reduced to a single frame. I held it against my chest. Nobody said anything. They had already moved on. Eric walked into Grandpa's workshop. The room still smelled of cedar. Wood shavings covered the old workbench, exactly as Grandpa had left them. He looked around once. We don't need any of this. One contractor asked, what should we keep? Eric shrugged. If it doesn't increase the property's value, throw it away. I froze. Throw it away. The tiny birdhouse I'd built when I was 8 still sat on the highest shelf. Crooked. Uneven. Grandpa had refused to let me fix it. He always smiled and said, imperfections tell the real story. A worker climbed the ladder, reached toward the shelf. I walked forward. I'll take that. The man stopped. Eric sighed dramatically. Seriously, it's just junk. I didn't answer. I simply carried the little birdhouse into the box with the photograph. It wasn't worth arguing. Nothing in that house was. Not anymore. Outside, another delivery truck arrived. Brand new outdoor furniture, still wrapped in plastic. My father signed the invoice without even reading it. Eric laughed. This place is going to look incredible. My father put an arm around his shoulder. It finally belongs to someone with vision. Someone with vision. I almost smiled. Grandpa never cared about expensive furniture. He cared about people. That's why every Christmas, he insisted everyone sat at the same table. No reserved seats. No favorites. No golden child. Maybe that's why my parents always hated hosting family dinners there. The equality made them uncomfortable. Now, they were redesigning the entire house, one room at a time, one memory at a time, until nothing remained. Around noon, I carried my last box to the car. No one offered to help. My mother barely looked up. You got everything? I think so. Good. She turned back to discussing marble countertops. Just before I closed the trunk, I heard another vehicle pulling into the driveway. A dark gray sedan. Harold. He climbed out carrying the same leather briefcase. Only this time, he wasn't smiling politely. He wasn't relaxed. He looked tired, like someone who hadn't slept. My father waved enthusiastically. Harold! I wasn't expecting you. I needed a signature. Harold didn't answer. He kept looking at the house, then at the contractors, then at the dumpsters already filling with Grandpa's belongings. His expression hardened. Finally, he looked directly at my father. Have you signed any renovation contracts? My father frowned. A few. Why? Harold's eyes shifted toward Eric. Have you sold anything? Eric answered proudly. A few collectibles. The tractor. Some equipment. And we're listing part of the farmland next week. For the first time since I'd met Harold, I watched the color drain from his face. He closed his eyes. Just for a second. When he opened them again, his voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. You shouldn't have done that. The laughter stopped. Every contractor looked up. Even the workers carrying furniture paused. My father forced a smile. What are you talking about? Harold tightened his grip on the briefcase. I asked all of you not to make any financial decisions. He took one slow breath, then looked directly at my father. We need to talk. Immediately. And for the first time since Grandpa died, I saw fear flash across my father's face. Nobody answered. For several long seconds, the only sound inside the house came from a drill somewhere upstairs. My father forced a laugh. Harold, you look like you've seen a ghost. Harold didn't smile. He slowly set his briefcase on Grandpa's dining table, the same table where our family had shared Thanksgiving dinners for more than 20 years. Now, it was covered with blueprints, countertop samples, flooring catalogs, paint swatches. Grandpa hadn't even been gone 2 weeks. My father's smile slowly faded. What is this about? Harold looked around the room. The contractors, the open boxes, the missing furniture, the empty walls. His eyes stopped on the large dumpster outside the living room window. Workers were throwing old furniture into it. One chair landed upside down. Another worker tossed in several framed photographs. Harold closed his eyes for a second, then looked back at my father. Tell everyone to stop. The room went quiet. Eric frowned. What? Stop the renovations. Nobody moved. Harold repeated himself. Immediately. My father folded his arms. I've already paid the deposits. I don't care. The workers need to stop. Eric laughed. This is ridiculous. We own the property now. Harold looked directly at him. Please, just do it. There was something different in his voice. Not authority. Not anger. Urgency. Real urgency. For the first time, even the contractors stopped working. One of them lowered his hammer. Another looked toward my father, waiting for instructions. My father shook his head. Keep working. The drilling started again. Harold's jaw tightened. You don't understand. My father took one slow step closer. Then explain it. Harold opened the folder, flipped through several pages, stopped. Read the same paragraph again. His thumb remained pressed against one line, almost as if he hoped the words would somehow disappear. They didn't. Eric leaned over the table. What exactly are you looking at? Harold quietly closed the folder. Not yet. My father sighed impatiently. Harold, you're making everyone nervous. I already am. The answer came so quickly. It caught everyone off guard. Even me. Harold had spent his entire career looking calm. Professional. Impossible to read. Now, he looked like a man realizing something far too late. He turned toward my father again. Have you transferred any money? No. Sign any loans? No. Open new accounts? No. Harold nodded once, almost relieved. Then he looked at Eric. You said you sold equipment. Eric shrugged. A few pieces. The old tractor. Some machinery Grandpa never used anymore. Harold's face went pale. When? This morning. To whom? I don't remember. It was a dealer. Cash deal. Silence. Harold lowered his head. One slow breath. Then another. Outside. A truck pulled away carrying Grandpa's tractor. Harold watched it disappear through the front gate. He whispered something under his breath. I couldn't hear it. My father could. What did you say? Harold looked back at him. I said, I wish you'd waited. Nobody spoke. My father let out a frustrated breath. You still haven't explained why. I can't. Not until I verify something. Eric threw his hands into the air. This is insane. If you don't know, why are we stopping everything? Harold looked at him for a long moment. Because whatever answer he was about to give, he decided not to. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number from memory. No one interrupted him. We simply watched. He waited. The call connected. Claire. His voice was lower now. I need every archived document from Richard Moore's estate. A pause. No. Not tomorrow. Today. Another pause. Then his expression changed. He slowly looked back at my father. What do you mean? There's another binder? My father frowned. What binder? Harold ignored him. He listened for several more seconds, then quietly answered, I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call, picked up his briefcase, and headed for the front door. My father stepped into his path. Harold! No more riddles. What is going on? Harold stopped. Without turning around, he said only one sentence. If I'm right, everything you believe you own today may look very different by tomorrow. Then he walked away, and for the first time since Grandpa's funeral, my father wasn't smiling anymore. I didn't follow Harold. I almost did, but something told me, whatever he was about to discover, he wasn't ready to share with anyone. Not yet. So I drove home. For the first time in 11 days, my apartment was completely silent. No phone calls, no demands, no messages from my parents telling me where to be or what to sign. Just silence. I placed Grandpa's photograph on the bookshelf, then the little birdhouse beside it. The wood was still rough beneath my fingertips. I smiled. Grandpa used to say every scratch told part of its story. Maybe people weren't so different. My phone vibrated. Dad. I let it ring. Then another call. Mom. Then Eric. 3 missed calls in less than 2 minutes. That was new. This morning. They couldn't wait to get rid of me. Now. They suddenly couldn't stop calling. Before I could wonder why, another call came through. Harold. I answered. Hello. His voice was calm. Too calm. Anna. I need to ask you something. I sat down. Go ahead. When your grandfather updated his estate 2 years ago, were you present? No. Did he ever tell you he'd made changes? I thought for a moment. No. He never discussed money with me. Another pause. What did he discuss? I looked at Grandpa's birdhouse. Family. Harold didn't respond. I could hear papers turning. Then another long silence. Finally, he asked one more question. Did he ever tell you why he refused to sell the farm? The question caught me off guard. He said. I stopped. For the first time in years, I remembered something I'd almost forgotten. We had been sitting on the back porch one evening, watching the sunset over the fields. I'd asked why he never accepted the developer's offers. He smiled without looking at me, then said something that hadn't made sense back then. Some things only look valuable until you discover what it costs to keep them. I repeated the sentence, word for word. Harold didn't speak. Not immediately. Then, I heard him quietly exhale, almost like he'd been waiting for those exact words. Thank you. The call ended. No explanation. No goodbye. Just silence. I stared at my phone. What had Grandpa meant? Outside, rain began tapping softly against the windows. I walked over and watched the clouds settle above the city. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about the house, or the land, or the money. I was thinking about Harold. Because lawyers don't spend an entire day chasing old files, unless they're looking for something specific. Across town, Harold was doing exactly that. The archive room smelled of dust and old paper. Metal shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Claire placed a thick gray binder on the table. You asked for everything. I brought everything. Harold opened it immediately. Property records, tax filings, commercial agreements, insurance policies, environmental reports, dozens of documents, years of paperwork. He flipped through them faster and faster. His fingers suddenly stopped. One page, folded differently from the rest. He unfolded it. Read the first paragraph, then the second. His expression froze. No, he whispered. Claire looked over. What is it? Harold didn't answer. He kept reading. Again and again. His hand slowly covered his mouth. The room became completely still. Claire had worked beside him for almost 15 years. She had seen billion-dollar divorces, corporate fraud, inheritance wars, She had never seen Harold Benson react like this. "What did you find?" He looked up. For several seconds, he simply stared at her, then quietly asked, "Who drafted this amendment?" Claire checked the signature. Her eyes widened. "Richard Moore himself." Harold looked back down. His pulse was racing now, because this wasn't an oversight. It wasn't a clerical mistake. It wasn't a missing page. It had been planned, every single word, years before Richard Moore died. Harold slowly closed the binder, picked up his phone, and made one final call. "My office." The receptionist answered. "Mr. Benson, cancel everything." A pause. "Everything. Every meeting. Every client. I don't care who it is. I need the Moore family in my conference room." He looked once more at the amendment, then quietly added, "As soon as possible." Because if this document meant what he believed it meant, Richard Moore hadn't simply divided an inheritance. He had designed a test, and someone had just walked straight into it. The conference room felt different this time. No coffee, no small talk, no congratulations, just silence. When I walked in, my parents were already there. My father sat exactly where he had signed the papers 4 days earlier. Only now, he wasn't smiling. Eric kept bouncing one leg beneath the table, trying to look relaxed, failing. My mother glanced at me for less than a second, then looked away. No one spoke. Harold entered carrying 2 thick binders. Not 1, 2. He placed them carefully in the middle of the table. One was the estate file we'd all seen before. The other, none of us recognized. My father broke the silence. "You've had us waiting all morning." Harold ignored the complaint. Instead, he opened the second binder. "I spent the last 3 days reviewing every amendment Richard Moore made during the final years of his life." Eric leaned back. "So?" Harold didn't answer. He slid one document across the table. My father barely looked at it. "We've already signed." "I know. Then what exactly is the issue?" Harold folded his hands. "The estate transferred exactly as your daughter instructed." My father nodded impatiently. "That's what we wanted." "I know." Another pause. Harold never raised his voice. He didn't need to. "The problem is what transferred with it." The room fell silent. Eric laughed. "What does that even mean?" Harold looked directly at him. "It means ownership," is only the first sentence. No one understood. My father frowned. "Speak plainly." Harold opened the binder. "Turn one page, then another." His finger stopped halfway down a paragraph. "This amendment wasn't attached to the draft you reviewed. It was filed separately." My mother's face tightened. "I don't remember signing anything else." "You didn't." "It was signed exclusively by Richard Moore." Eric shrugged. "So Grandpa changed something. People update wills all the time." Harold slowly shook his head. "This isn't part of the will. It governs how the estate must be administered after the transfer." My father leaned forward, and Harold didn't rush. He let the silence do the work. Then he looked at each of us, one by one. Richard Moore had planned this conversation years before any of us walked into that office. The beneficiary, who elects to receive the estate as a consolidated holding, accepts every obligation attached to that holding. Eric frowned. "What obligations?" Harold didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled another document from the binder, then another, then another. He lined them up across the table. Commercial lease agreements, long-term maintenance contracts, operating commitments, agricultural preservation agreements, environmental restoration obligations. My father stared at the stack. His confidence began to fade. "What exactly are you trying to say?" Harold finally met his eyes. "I'm saying, your daughter didn't give you a house." He slid the next document forward. "She gave you an operating estate." Another page. "She gave you active contracts." Another page. "She gave you legal commitments." Another. "She gave you responsibilities that cannot simply be abandoned." Eric's smile disappeared. My mother looked from one document to another. This can't be right." Harold calmly opened the final section of the binder. "It is." My father pushed the papers away. "No, nobody mentioned any of this." Harold's expression never changed. You never asked. The room went completely still. For the first time since Grandpa died, no one had an answer. My father looked toward me, not with anger, not yet, with confusion, real confusion, as if he couldn't understand why I wasn't surprised. The truth was, I wasn't, because Grandpa had once told me something I'd never forgotten. Some inheritances only looked like gifts from the outside. Harold slowly closed the binder. I haven't finished. Those 4 words landed harder than anything he'd said so far. Because if this was only the beginning, none of us were prepared for what came next. Nobody touched the documents. My father kept staring at them, as if refusing to read them could somehow change what was written. Finally, he looked up. So what happens? Harold answered without emotion. Now, you begin fulfilling every obligation attached to the estate. Eric laughed, a nervous laugh this time. Fine, we'll hire people. Harold slowly shook his head. You already have. He opened another section of the binder. Richard more personally guaranteed the operating contracts. He never separated the assets from the responsibilities. Another page slid across the table. The farm must remain operational. Another. The commercial leases must continue to be honored. Another. The environmental restoration schedule cannot be abandoned. Another. The Preservation Trust requires annual funding. My mother's face slowly lost all color. There has to be a way out. Harold looked at her. There was. The room fell silent. My father frowned. What do you mean? Harold turned one final page. There was an option to divide the estate. He paused. You rejected it. Nobody spoke. He continued. There was also an option to refuse the consolidated transfer. Another pause. You rejected that too. Eric looked confused. I don't remember seeing those. You didn't. You interrupted me before I finished explaining the documents. Those words landed like a hammer. I remembered that morning perfectly. Harold had tried to slow everyone down. My father had rushed him. My mother had rushed me. Eric had rushed the meeting. Every warning had been ignored because they were too busy celebrating. My father leaned forward. So fix it. Harold didn't react. You represented us. I represented the transfer. I cannot rewrite your decisions. My father's voice became sharper. Then transfer part of it back. I can't. Why not? Because ownership has already been registered. Another silence. Eric finally looked at me. For the first time in days, there was no arrogance in his eyes. Only uncertainty. You knew. I held his gaze. I knew Grandpa never made careless decisions. That was all I said. Nothing more. Nothing less. Harold opened one final folder. I've also received the first financial reports. He handed them to my father. The room grew even quieter. Operating costs, property taxes, equipment maintenance, employee obligations, insurance renewals, infrastructure repairs, everything due within weeks. Not years. Weeks. My father kept turning pages faster and faster. His breathing changed. This can't be right. It is. The projected annual operating cost exceeds the current liquid reserves. Eric swallowed hard. So, what happens if we don't pay? Harold answered immediately. You default. And if we default, the contracts begin to fail. And then, the lenders accelerate their rights. Another page. The preservation agreements trigger penalties. Another. The commercial tenants pursue damages. Another. The estate begins losing protected assets. Nobody interrupted him anymore. Nobody laughed. Nobody smiled. The confidence that had filled this room 4 days earlier was gone. Completely gone. My mother slowly reached for my hand. The same hand she pushed toward the pen. This time, her fingers trembled. Anna! Her voice cracked. We're family. I looked down at her hand, then quietly pulled mine away. Family. That word had been strangely absent. When they emptied Grandpa's house, when they erased my bedroom, when they called me jealous, when they celebrated taking everything. Now, suddenly, I was family again. Harold quietly closed the last binder. Then he looked directly at my parents. I've practiced estate law for 28 years. I've seen families spend decades fighting over inheritances. He paused. But I've never seen anyone destroy their own future. By insisting on getting exactly what they wanted, the room became completely silent. No one argued, because for the first time, everyone understood. The inheritance had never been the prize. It had been the test. And my parents had failed at the moment they demanded everything. For the next 3 weeks, my phone never stopped ringing. At first, it was my father, then my mother, then Eric, then all 3 of them, over and over again. Voicemails, text messages, emails, even handwritten letters. It was amazing. For 34 years, they had struggled to remember my birthday. Now, they suddenly remembered my phone number. Every single day, I listened to only one voicemail. It was my mother's. She was crying. "Anna, we made mistakes. We're still your family. Please, just call us." I deleted it, not because I hated her, because there was nothing left to say. Some conversations come years too late. A week later, Harold called. "I thought you'd want an update." I looked out my apartment window. "I already know they lost the estate. You know part of it. There was more. There usually is." He sounded almost tired. "The commercial tenants terminated 2 agreements. The preservation board issued formal notices. The restoration deadlines were missed. The operating accounts are nearly exhausted." I stayed quiet. Harold continued. "They've started selling personal assets. The vacation home, the boat, your father's classic Mustang, even Eric's brand new truck, the one he'd started shopping for, before the ink on the inheritance papers had dried." "It still wasn't enough," Harold said quietly. I closed my eyes, not because I felt sorry for them, because I suddenly remembered Grandpa laughing one afternoon in his workshop. He'd been sanding a crooked piece of wood. I'd asked why he never rushed anything. He smiled, then said, "The hardest lessons are usually the ones people choose for themselves." At the time, I thought he was talking about woodworking. Now, I finally understood. 2 days later, someone knocked on my apartment door. I already knew who it was. My father stood outside. For the first time in my life, he looked smaller, older. The expensive suits were gone. His shoulders slumped. His hands trembled. Behind him, my mother stood silently. Eric didn't even lift his head. Nobody tried to walk inside. Nobody acted entitled anymore. My father swallowed. "We need your help." I didn't answer. He looked down. "We've spoken with 3 law firms. They all said the same thing." Another pause. "They said only you might convince Harold to reopen the estate. Only me, the daughter who'd never understood business. The daughter who'd always been jealous. The daughter they'd erased from Grandpa's house before his funeral flowers had wilted. Now, I was their last hope." I looked at my father. Really looked at him. For years, I'd imagined this moment. I'd imagined yelling, listing every cruel thing they'd ever done, making them feel exactly what I'd felt. Instead, I realized something surprising. I didn't need revenge anymore. Life had already done the talking. "I can't help you," I said quietly. My father looked up. "You won't." "I can't. The estate belongs to you. It has since the day I signed." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, because he finally understood. There was no hidden document, no legal loophole, no second chance, only the choice they'd insisted on making. They turned and walked away together, slower than I'd ever seen them walk. I watched until they disappeared down the hallway. Then I closed the door. That evening, I drove out to Grandpa's cemetery. The air was quiet. I placed the little birdhouse beside his headstone for a moment. Still crooked, still imperfect, exactly the way he'd wanted it. I smiled. "You knew they'd choose everything." The wind moved gently through the trees. No answer came. None was needed, because I finally understood what Grandpa had left me. It was never the house. It was never the land. It was never the money. He left me something far more valuable. The chance to let people reveal exactly who they were, before they destroyed themselves. My parents spent my entire life believing that taking everything meant winning. The day I stopped fighting them, they finally learned how expensive greed can be.